The Zelda fandom is a notoriously fickle one, or so I've heard. I'm too young to have experienced the infamous Zelda cycle of the 1990s and 2000s. You know, the one where Nintendo releases a new Zelda game and everybody loves it and ignores its flaws for a bit while calling the last one overrated. As time passes, people start to notice the flaws a bit more, and by the time the next game is announced, the current game is moving into that overrated spot, while the previous one has a nostalgic redemption as fans put on their rose-colored glasses. Breath of the Wild was my first Zelda experience. I never owned a Wii growing up, so I missed out on Skyward Sword, and when the universal acclaim Breath of the Wild received upon release lasted deep into the game's life cycle, I didn't realize how rare that was. Rare enough, apparently, for Nintendo to make a direct sequel to the game. Whether that sequel will kick the Zelda cycle back into gear remains to be seen, but for the time being, Breath of the Wild has shattered it. But why has the game aged so well? It's not its mechanical brilliance. Looking at you, weapon durability system. No, people love Breath of the Wild for its atmosphere. Unfortunately, this is an incredibly difficult thing to quantify. Atmosphere is an abstract concept that every player may experience and understand differently. However, while it's nigh impossible to measure the atmosphere of Breath of the Wild with the intimacy of feeling that comes with playing the game, by looking at the game through the lenses of space and place, we can cover some of the basic aspects that create this beloved iteration of Hyrule. Before we approach the game itself, we first must understand what I mean when I describe the game in terms of space and place. The concepts of space and place exist at the intersection of ontology, the study of being, anthropology, the study of humanity, and geography, which, you know what that is. Any one video would be hard-pressed to cover the depth of their meaning and the breadth of their connotations, so for the sake of this video, the basic definitions provided by cultural geographer Doreen Massey in her 1994 book Space, Place, and Gender, as well as some additional thoughts from her 2005 book For Space will be used. Let's begin with space. Massey defines space as the, quote, simultaneous coexistence of social interactions at all geographical scales, end quote, and, quote, the sphere of possibility of the existence of multiplicity, end quote. These definitions are accurate, but
it's wordy and hard to read.
To characterize space in a more practical manner, while spaces are defined in the traditional sense by the physical area they cover, they're also defined by their potential for social experiences and occasions. There's a reason I started with space. Our concept of place is tied directly to our definition of space. There is no understanding the latter without first understanding the former. And Massey says as much when she talks about place, defining place as being, quote, formed out of the particular set of social relations which interact at a particular location, end quote. In other words, as spaces carry virtually limitless potential for experience, places are defined by the social occurrences that are realized from that potential. So how do these concepts apply to The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild? It's best explained in two parts. First, Breath of the Wild provides the player with the ideal space, the perfect sphere of possibility of the existence of multiplicity. This space is Hyrule, and director Hidemaru Fujibayashi and his team realized the spatial ideas of both physical and social potential in this iteration through use of an open world in depth and combat encounters. Second, Breath of the Wild encourages the player to create their own places by using their protagonist, Link, as a direct conduit for the player's interaction with the world of Hyrule. Of course, before we can tackle place, we must first understand space. So let's talk about the Hyrule we know. The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild opens with a call from the void. Link is awoken from slumber, and after the Shrine of Resurrection teaches you the game's basic controls, you exit this shrine to see, well, this. The game does not provide you with a map at this point, so your only choice is to explore, to interact. The game doesn't completely throw you to the wolves, though, nudging you towards this old man, who helps you through the rest of the tutorial. After completing the Great Plateau tutorial, you're free to go in any direction you'd like, but Nintendo recognizes traversing such a massive area of adventurous possibility without any guidance would be far more frustrating than it would be freeing, which is why part of the tutorial is activating a tower, one of many that unlocks a topographical map of the region you're in. This concept isn't something unique to Breath of the Wild, but it is something Nintendo executes far better than most of its competitors. And if you're interested in learning more about that, here's a great video by Frustrated Jacob on it. This freedom is a sphere of possibility described by Massey in the geographical sense, and the overwhelming feeling that it might create is balanced by the game's gift of clear landmarks to look for without ever explicitly telling you to explore them. However, this is only half the definition. The component of social possibility is what really defines our understanding of space. And in this regard, Nintendo deliver as well with their combat. Hyrule is absolutely littered with life. There are plenty of passive and neutral animal NPCs roaming the wilderness, but what really sells Hyrule as a space is the variety of hostile mobs, each with their own distinct personalities. Upon encountering a new one for the first time, you're encouraged to learn not just how to fight it, but how to sneak around with it, how to distract it, and even how to convince it not to fight you. Let's look at arguably the toughest enemy type in Breath of the Wild as an example, the Lionel. Lionels will notice you from pretty far away, and they can and will smite you from a distance with a barrage of elemental arrows. So, avoiding their attention is a tough ask, especially in the early game when you don't even have the gear to boost your stealth attributes. Close combat isn't easy either, with one of the highest health bars in the game, and even the weakest variants possessing 6 strong close to mid-range attacks. However, you'll eventually learn that Lionels are honorable warriors, and they'll let you pass as long as you keep your weapon sheathed. They'll stare at you if you invade their space, but they won't attack you. The fact that each encounter with a Lionel doesn't have to end in combat is a perfect example of social possibility, and this factor becomes space-defining multiplicity when you multiply this by all of the quirks of all of the enemy types found throughout the game. With all that being said, if the physical and social multiplicity of Breath of the Wild's geography and combat are what makes Hyrule a space, Link and his interactions with NPCs are what allow players to create their own places. So let's talk a little bit more about that. Link is an interesting protagonist for a number of reasons, the Zelda timeline being one of them, shout out Brian David Gilbert, but the two most pertinent to this video are the relatability created by his silence and character design, both of which are key to allowing the player to create places in the space of Hyrule. Link's silence does have an in-game explanation, which can be found in Princess Zelda's diary in Hyrule Castle, and basically it explains that he maintains his stoicism due to the burden of protecting Hyrule that lies upon his shoulders. However, this piece of information is so far out of the way, hidden in a side room in the most dangerous location in the game, that it's only reasonable to conclude it exists as a lore-completing Easter egg, rather than some fundamental truth. Rather, the primary reason for Link's silence is that protagonists who say lines are fundamentally creating an existence apart from the player. Voice acting gives characters personality. Lines give them textual motivations and direct characterization, and while these are not bad things, the Legend of Zelda franchise has historically wanted its players to be able to project themselves into the role of Link. Maintaining Link's silence and providing only the most basic responses during interactions allows the player to make decisions as themselves through Link, rather than making decisions as Link. This is furthered by Link's androgynous design. Upon release of the first official images of Breath of the Wild, fans were unsure as to whether Link was male or female, and while producer Eiji Aonuma has clarified that Link is male, he stated that his androgynous design was intentional, saying, quote, "I really wanted Link's design to encompass more of a gender-neutral figure. I wanted to create a character where anybody would be able to relate to the character," end quote. Giving the player agency as themselves in this sort of way allows them to create spaces by forming their own social bonds. When you visit a stable, it doesn't feel like Beetle the trader is happy to see Link, it feels like he's happy to see you. When you visit a stable, it doesn't feel like Beetle the trader is happy to see Link, it feels like he's happy to see you. When you play games with the children in Hateno Village, they're not excited to play with Link, they're excited to play with you. And when King Dorphan thanks you for helping free the Zora people and various NPCs offer their thanks when you interact with them, it feels like you're being thanked personally. All the interactions you can have with reoccurring NPCs that live in villages and populate locations you often return to can feel personal to you. It's about as close as you can get to social interaction in a single-player game, and knowing that you, and I say you because while it may technically be Link, it's really you, have these relationships with the people of Hyrule allows the areas they live in to become places within the broader space of the game's world. That's the magic of Breath of the Wild. The game presents you with a wild world full of possibilities, and as you explore it with just enough guidance to prevent you from feeling lost, you get to find pockets within the world to realize specific sets of social instances, pockets you can revisit and define even further with the game's plethora of side quests and optional content. Each player will have their own favorite NPCs, decide to make their homes in different areas, and ultimately play through the game in their own unique ways. But for all of them, they'll be able to create that atmosphere by creating their own places within the developer's expertly defined space. And that's what makes this game so beloved. I've been Caleb Finnemore, and thank you for watching.